Commander Vexhai of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy had seen war across 17 star systems. His purple-scaled hide bore the scars of plasma burns from the siege of Kepler 442, and his 4 eyes had witnessed the orbital bombardment of 3 rebel worlds. At 230 years old, he considered himself a student of warfare, a scholar of destruction who understood the delicate dance between strategy and chaos that determined the fate of civilizations. Standing on the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, Vexhai studied the tactical display with the confidence of experience. The Terran defense fleet hung in space before them, a pitiful collection of ships that looked more like cargo haulers than warships. Intelligence reports indicated these humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. 50 years. The Zephyrian Empire had been conquering star systems when these creatures were still throwing rocks at each other. Admiral, his communications officer hissed through his translator implant, the humans are broadcasting on all frequencies. They demand we withdraw from their territory and return their captured colonists. Vexhai's mandibles clicked in amusement. Territory? They have 3 barely developed worlds and call it territory? What is our fleet strength, Lieutenant Mordash? 847 vessels, sir. 12 dreadnoughts, 36 heavy cruisers, 115 destroyers, and the remainder support craft. The humans field approximately 200 ships, mostly frigates and destroyers. No dreadnought-class vessels detected. The numbers spoke for themselves. This would not be a battle, it would be an extermination. Vexhai had participated in similar operations against 6 different species over his career. The pattern never changed. Initial resistance, desperate tactics, eventual surrender, and integration into the Empire as a client species. Some fought longer than others, but the outcome remained constant. Open a channel to their flagship, Vexhai commanded. Let us offer them the traditional terms. Perhaps they will be wise enough to accept. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the interior of what appeared to be a human command center. The being that faced him was unremarkable by any military standard Vexhai knew. No ceremonial armor, no intimidating biological weapons, no signs of genetic enhancement. The creature wore a simple gray uniform with minimal decoration. Its pale skin and thin frame suggested a species that had never truly tested itself in serious combat. I am Fleet Admiral Sarachin of the Terran Defense Force, the human said without preamble. You are in violation of the territorial sovereignty of the Sol Republic. Withdraw your forces immediately, or we will be forced to engage. Vexhai studied the human's face through his tactical overlay. No fear indicators, no submission postures, no recognition of the hopeless odds. Either this species was remarkably ignorant of military realities, or they possessed some form of combat psychosis that prevented rational assessment of threats. I am Commander Vexhai of His Imperial Majesty's 4th Conquest Fleet, he replied, allowing his voice to carry the full weight of authority. You face a force 4 times your number, equipped with weapons technology centuries beyond your current capabilities. I offer you the traditional terms of surrender. Your military forces will be disbanded, your government will acknowledge imperial sovereignty, and your people will be granted client status within the Empire. In return, your worlds will not be reduced to radioactive wastelands, and your population will not face extinction. You have 1 hour to consider these generous terms. The human admiral showed no change in expression. Commander Vexhai, I appreciate your confidence in superior numbers and technology. However, I must inform you that you have made several fundamental errors in your assessment of this situation. Indeed? Vexhai's mandibles clicked again. He had heard similar words from the Krolex Confederation, the Stellar Theocracy, and the Machine Collective of Andromeda. All now serve the Empire in various capacities. Please, enlighten me regarding these alleged errors. First, you assume that numerical superiority guarantees victory. Second, you believe that technological advancement alone determines combat effectiveness. Third, and, most critically, you have never fought humans before. You have no understanding of what that means. The connection terminated from the human end. Vexhai stared at the blank screen for several seconds. In 2 centuries of military service, no enemy commander had ever cut communications during surrender negotiations. The gesture spoke of either incredible arrogance or unshakable determination. Given the tactical situation, arrogance seemed more likely. Admiral, Lieutenant Mordash reported, the humans are moving into attack formation. They appear to be organizing into smaller groups rather than maintaining a traditional battle line. Vexhai turned his attention to the tactical display. The human fleet had indeed abandoned conventional formation protocols. Instead of arranging their ships in the standard defensive screen formation that every spacefaring civilization eventually developed, they were clustering into groups of 5 to 10 vessels. Even more puzzling, these groups were positioning themselves at seemingly random points throughout the battlespace. Analysis of their formation, Lieutenant? Unknown, sir. The computer cannot identify any recognized tactical doctrine. They appear to be improvising. Improvising. Vexhai had seen improvisation before, usually in the final desperate moments of a losing battle when traditional tactics had failed and commanders resorted to wild gambles. But, to begin a battle with improvisation suggested either genius or madness, and, given the odds, madness seemed more probable. Signal the fleet, Vexhai commanded. We will advance in standard battle formation. Dreadnoughts will engage their largest vessels, cruisers will provide fire support, destroyers will handle cleanup operations. No need to deviate from proven tactics against such a disorganized opponent. The Zephyrian fleet began its advance with the precision of a machine. 8 centuries of imperial naval doctrine guided their movements. Dreadnoughts at the center, heavy weapons trained forward. Cruisers in supporting positions, ready to exploit breaches in enemy lines. Destroyers spread wide to prevent flanking maneuvers and chase down fleeing vessels. It was a formation that had conquered the galaxy. As the distance between the fleets closed, Vexhai noted the first anomaly. The humans were not retreating. Every species he had faced showed some form of withdrawal behavior when confronted with overwhelming force, even if they intended to fight. They would fall back to more defensible positions, buy time for evacuation, or attempt to draw Imperial forces into some form of trap. The humans were accelerating toward the Imperial fleet. Sir, Mordash reported with a note of confusion in his voice, the human vessels are increasing speed. They appear to be attempting a direct assault on our formation. Vexhai studied the approaching human ships through his enhanced optics. Their acceleration was indeed impressive for such primitive vessels, but charging directly into the teeth of a superior force remained suicide by any rational military standard. Perhaps their technology was even more limited than intelligence reports suggested. Perhaps their commanders simply lacked the experience to understand the futility of their position. Long-range weapons, Vexhai ordered. Begin engagement. Target their larger vessels first. Let us demonstrate the price of their foolishness. The first salvo of Imperial plasma cannon fire reached out across space, brilliant streams of superheated particles designed to melt through armor plating and vaporize everything beyond. Vexhai watched with professional satisfaction as the weapons struck their targets. And watched in growing confusion as several human ships continued their approach despite direct hits. Lieutenant, verify weapon effectiveness. Our plasma cannons should have destroyed those vessels. Mordash bent over his instruments, confusion evident in his posture. Sir, weapons are functioning normally. Direct hits confirmed on 7 human vessels. However, they appear to have sustained significantly less damage than predicted. Their armor composition may be different from our models. Different armor was possible, but plasma weapons operated at temperatures that should overwhelm any known material science. Vexhai had seen planets with naturally occurring superdense metals resist such weapons for minutes at best. No starship should be capable of mounting armor thick enough to provide meaningful protection against Imperial heavy weapons. The human ships reached effective firing range and opened fire with their own weapons. Vexhai expected particle beams, plasma cannons, or perhaps some form of energy torpedo. Every spacefaring civilization eventually developed weapons based on these principles because they represented the most efficient methods of delivering destructive force across interstellar distances. The humans fired metal. Solid metal projectiles launched at significant fractions of light speed, but still fundamentally primitive kinetic weapons that predated energy-based ship-to-ship combat by millennia. Vexhai almost laughed at the absurdity until the first projectile struck the heavy cruiser Magnificent Conquest. The cruiser simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not disabled, not reduced to debris. The massive warship, 3 kilometers of Imperial engineering and firepower, was there one moment and, gone the next, replaced by an expanding sphere of superheated gas and scattered atomic particles. Report! Vexhai roared, his confidence cracking for the first time in decades. Sir, the human projectile appears to have been a dense metal penetrator moving at approximately 60% light speed. Upon impact, the kinetic energy release was equivalent to a strategic nuclear weapon. The magnificent conquest was completely vaporized. Before Vexhai could process this information, more human weapons found their targets. Another cruiser vanished in a flash of nuclear fire. A destroyer broke apart as a kinetic penetrator tore through its length like tissue paper. The humans were not firing energy weapons because they did not need energy weapons. They were throwing pieces of metal with such incredible velocity that the impact energy dwarfed anything in the Imperial arsenal. Evasive maneuvers. Vexhai commanded. All vessels, emergency scatter pattern. But, the human projectiles were not guided missiles that could be evaded through maneuver. They were solid metal traveling at relativistic speeds. By the time a ship's sensors detected the incoming projectile, it had already arrived. The laws of physics made dodging impossible at such ranges. The human fleet was not charging blindly into Imperial guns. They were positioning themselves at precise points where their kinetic weapons would have maximum effect while remaining at the edge of effective plasma cannon range. What Vexhai had interpreted as random positioning was actually sophisticated mathematical calculation designed to exploit the weaknesses of Imperial tactics. More ships died. The dreadnought Eternal Victory staggered under a kinetic impact that punched completely through its armor and detonated its primary ammunition storage. Secondary explosions tore the mighty vessel apart from within. 3 destroyers vanished in rapid succession as human gunners found their targets with impossible accuracy. Sir, Mordash's voice carried a note of panic. The humans are not fighting like any known spacefaring species. Their weapons systems appear to be based on entirely different principles than anything in our tactical database. Vexhai forced his mind to accept what his eyes were showing him. The humans were not fighting like any spacefaring species because they were not thinking like any spacefaring species. They had not followed the traditional technological development path of energy weapons and defensive screens. They had taken kinetic weapons, the most primitive form of space combat, and perfected them to a degree that made energy weapons irrelevant. Close to minimum range, Vexhai ordered. All ships, maximum acceleration. We must engage them in close combat where their kinetic weapons cannot be brought to bear effectively. It was a desperate gambit, but close-range energy combat remained the Imperial Navy's greatest strength. If they could survive the approach and engage the humans at point-blank range, superior numbers would still carry the day. The human fleet adapted instantly to the Imperial advance. Instead of maintaining their firing positions, they began to scatter in all directions, using their superior acceleration to maintain optimal engagement ranges. Their ships moved like fighters rather than capital vessels, twisting and turning through space with incredible agility. More Imperial ships died as they crossed the killing ground. The humans were not simply firing randomly into the Imperial formation. Each shot was carefully calculated to target the most valuable vessels, the command ships and heavy units that formed the backbone of Imperial power. They were systematically dismantling the invasion force with mathematical precision. Admiral, Lieutenant Mordash reported, "We have lost 43 vessels including 3 dreadnoughts. Human losses are minimal." Vexhai could see the tactical display for himself. Red indicators marked the positions where Imperial ships had been destroyed, creating a trail of death across the battlespace. The human fleet remained almost intact, having lost perhaps a dozen vessels to lucky plasma cannon hits. This was not war as Vexhai understood it. This was not the careful chess match of fleet engagement and tactical maneuver that had characterized Imperial campaigns for centuries. This was something fundamentally different, something that violated every assumption about how civilized species conducted space warfare. Open communications with the human flagship, Vexhai commanded. All frequencies. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen again, and Vexhai noticed details he had missed before. The human's expression remained calm, but her eyes held an intensity that spoke of absolute focus. This was not a desperate commander fighting a hopeless battle. This was a predator that had lured its prey into a carefully prepared trap. "Commander Vexhai," Admiral Chen said without preamble, "I trust you are beginning to understand your situation more clearly." "What are you?" Vexhai asked, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic protocol. "What kind of species develops such weapons?" "We are a species that learned to fight before we learned to fly," Admiral Chen replied. "We spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other before we ever left our home world.
We studied war the way other species study mathematics or poetry. We made it into a science. Vexai stared at the human commander as the implications settled into his mind. Most species develop spaceflight as an extension of scientific curiosity or resource acquisition. They learn to fight in space as a secondary skill, adapting terrestrial military concepts to a three-dimensional environment. But, if a species had perfected warfare before achieving spaceflight, if they had spent millennia thinking about nothing but more efficient ways to kill. You studied us, Vexai said with growing understanding. You knew we were coming. We have been monitoring Imperial communications for 30 years, Admiral Chen confirmed. We studied your tactics, your weapons, your doctrine. We prepared specifically for this encounter. Every simulation we ran showed the same result. Your forces are optimized for fighting other energy weapon civilizations. You have never faced kinetic weapons deployed at this level of sophistication. The tactical display showed more Imperial ships dying as the battle continued. Human vessels darted through the wreckage like predatory fish, their kinetic weapons reaching out to claim more victims. The careful formation that had conquered star systems was being carved apart by weapons that belonged to an earlier age of warfare. What do you want? Vexai asked. The same thing you offered us, Admiral Chen replied. Surrender. Your forces will be interned, your government will acknowledge Terran sovereignty over this region of space, and your people will be granted the opportunity to coexist peacefully with humanity. In return, we will not pursue your fleet to its home system and demonstrate these weapons to your population centers. Vexai considered his options. He could continue the battle and watch his remaining ships die one by one. He could attempt to withdraw and face execution for cowardice when he returned to Imperial space. Or he could accept the impossible reality that a species of primitives had just defeated the finest fleet in the galaxy using weapons made of metal and momentum. I need to consult with my staff, Vexai said. You have 10 minutes, Admiral Chen replied. After that, we will assume you have chosen to continue this demonstration. The communication ended, leaving Vexai alone with the wreckage of everything he thought he understood about warfare. On the tactical display, human ships continued their deadly dance, each movement calculated to inflict maximum damage while avoiding return fire. He had been wrong about the humans. They were not primitives who had stumbled into space warfare without understanding its principles. They were something far more dangerous. They were a species that had taken war itself and refined it into a perfect science, unencumbered by the traditional assumptions that limited other civilizations. For the first time in 2 centuries of military service, Commander Vexai faced an enemy that understood war better than he did. And, for the first time in his life, he was afraid. Admiral Saracen watched Commander Vexai's face disappear from the communication screen and turned her attention back to the tactical display. The Zephyrian fleet was in chaos, their perfect formations reduced to scattered groups of desperate ships trying to avoid the next kinetic strike. Red markers indicated the positions of destroyed enemy vessels, a testament to 30 years of careful preparation and strategic thinking. Status report, Commander Martinez, Chen requested from her tactical officer. Enemy fleet has lost approximately 50% of its heavy units, Admiral. 47 total vessels destroyed, including 4 dreadnoughts. Our losses stand at 11 ships, mostly due to concentrated plasma cannon fire during the initial engagement phase. The Zephyrians are attempting to regroup at coordinates 77 Mark 12. Chen nodded, studying the enemy movements with professional interest. The Zephyrian commander was not incompetent. His attempt to close range and negate the kinetic weapon advantage showed tactical understanding. Under normal circumstances, it might have even worked. But these were not normal circumstances. Humanity had spent 3 decades preparing for this exact scenario. Signal Captain Rodriguez on the Indomitable, Chen ordered. Begin Phase 2. The second phase of the human battle plan involved something the Zephyrians had not yet seen. As the enemy fleet struggled to regroup, 30 human vessels that had remained hidden behind a nearby asteroid field began to accelerate into the battle zone. These were not the destroyers and frigates that had engaged the Imperial fleet initially. These were purpose-built kinetic weapon platforms, ships designed around single massive railguns capable of accelerating projectiles to 70% of light speed. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, Chen's science advisor, approached from her station near the rear of the bridge. At 63 years old, Harper had spent her entire career studying alien technology and developing countermeasures.
Her insights had been instrumental in preparing humanity for this encounter.
Admiral, the enemy is responding exactly as our simulations predicted.
They are attempting to use their superior numbers to overwhelm our defensive positions, but they have not adapted to our kinetic weapon doctrine.
Their energy shields are completely useless against solid projectiles at these velocities.
Chen had worked with Harper for 15 years, ever since the first Imperial scout ships had been detected at the edge of human space.
Together, they had analyzed every piece of alien technology they could acquire, reverse engineering not just the hardware but the thinking behind it.
What they had discovered was both reassuring and terrifying.
Alien civilizations thought about warfare in fundamentally different ways than humans.
Dr. Harper, remind me of your analysis regarding Imperial tactical doctrine.
Harper consulted her data pad with the precision of an academic presenting research.
Imperial forces rely heavily on energy weapons and defensive screening technology. Their tactical development follows a logical progression from planetary defense to space-based combat, emphasizing technological superiority over tactical innovation. They expect their enemies to follow similar development patterns and employ comparable technologies.
And they never encountered kinetic weapons at this level of sophistication? Never, Admiral.
Our analysis of captured Imperial databases shows they classify kinetic weapons as primitive technology suitable only for planetary bombardment or anti-asteroid operations. No known spacefaring civilization has ever used kinetic penetrators as primary ship-to-ship weapons. The mathematics required for accurate targeting at relativistic speeds, combined with the engineering challenges of containing such energies, apparently led most species to abandon this approach in favor of energy weapons.
Chen allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had not abandoned kinetic weapons because humanity had never seen them as primitive. Human engineers had looked at the challenge of accelerating metal to incredible speeds and seen an interesting problem to solve.
Human military theorists had looked at the devastating potential of relativistic impacts and seen the ultimate expression of warfare.
Most importantly, human physicists had done the mathematics. Signal to all squadron commanders, Chen ordered. Prepare for close engagement protocol. The enemy is going to try something desperate. On the tactical display, the Zephyrian fleet was indeed attempting something desperate.
Instead of maintaining their scattered formation, they were consolidating into a single massive formation aimed directly at the human fleet's center. It was a classical breakthrough maneuver, designed to punch through enemy lines and engage in close combat where superior numbers would matter.
Commander HFY was gambling everything on a single decisive assault. Chen had to admit it was a reasonable gamble.
If the Zephyrians could close to point-blank range, their energy weapons would be devastatingly effective against human ships. Human vessels were not heavily armored by galactic standards, having been designed for speed and maneuverability rather than survivability. A close-range energy weapon duel would favor the side with more guns, and the Imperial fleet still maintained a significant numerical advantage despite their losses. Unfortunately for Commander HFY, Chen had anticipated exactly this response.
Commander Martinez signaled the orbital defense grid. Authorization code Omega 77.
Martinez looked up from his console with surprise.
Admiral, the defense grid is 3 light hours away.
Even at maximum acceleration, projectiles from the grid won't reach this position for
47 minutes, Chen finished.
Which is why we fired them 2 hours ago. The expression on Martinez's face shifted from confusion to understanding to something approaching awe. Chen had ordered the defense grid to fire before the battle had even begun, calculating the exact time and trajectory needed for the projectiles to arrive at the moment they would be most effective. Dr. Harper consulted her calculations with obvious appreciation for the precision involved. The grid projectiles are moving at 85% light speed and massing approximately 10 tons each.
When they arrive, the kinetic energy release will be equivalent to
several hundred nuclear weapons, Chen finished.
Each.
The orbital defense grid represented humanity's most advanced kinetic weapon technology. Built in the asteroid belt over 15 years, the grid consisted of 64 massive electromagnetic accelerators capable of launching projectiles at near relativistic speeds across interplanetary distances. The weapons had originally been designed as a last resort defense against planetary invasion, but their range made them effective against targets throughout the solar system. The Zephyrian fleet continued its desperate charge toward the human formation, unaware that death was racing toward them at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Commander Vexhai was probably calculating the time until close engagement, estimating casualties, planning his breakthrough assault. He had no way of knowing that in 47 minutes, his fleet would simply cease to exist. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Park reported from the communications station, were receiving multiple transmissions from the enemy fleet. They appear to be coordinating their assault. Shen listened to the translated Zephyrian communications with professional interest. The enemy commander was indeed coordinating a breakthrough assault, dividing his remaining forces into 3 attack groups designed to overwhelm human defensive positions through concentrated firepower. It was a competent plan that might have worked against any conventional enemy. Dr. Harper, what does Imperial doctrine say about withdrawal under these circumstances? Harper reviewed her files on alien military psychology. Imperial commanders are trained to accept significant losses in pursuit of strategic objectives. Commander Vexhai will likely continue the assault unless his losses exceed 70% of total force strength. However, our intelligence suggests that successful retreat from this type of engagement would result in his execution for cowardice upon return to Imperial space. Shen nodded with understanding. The Zephyrian commander was trapped between the certainty of death in battle and the certainty of execution if he retreated. From his perspective, the only rational choice was to fight to the end and hope for a miracle. Shen was about to deny him that miracle. All squadrons, prepare for defensive maneuver 7 Alpha. We're going to give them a clear target and let them commit to their attack run. The human fleet began to shift formation, creating what appeared to be a gap in their defensive line. To the Zephyrian commander, it would look like an opportunity to break through human defenses and engage in close combat. In reality, it was a carefully calculated trap designed to channel the enemy fleet into a specific area of space. An area of space that would contain several hundred relativistic projectiles in approximately 30 minutes. Admiral, Commander Martinez observed, the enemy is taking the bait. All 3 attack groups are converging on the apparent gap in our formation. Shen watched the Zephyrian ships accelerate toward their doom with something approaching sympathy. Commander Vexhai was a competent officer facing an impossible situation. His tactics were sound, his execution was professional, and his courage was undeniable. Under different circumstances, Shen might have enjoyed the intellectual challenge of facing such an opponent in fair combat. But these circumstances were not fair, and Shen had not spent 30 years preparing for this battle in order to give the enemy an equal chance. Dr. Harper, what do we know about Zephyrian culture regarding military honor? Harper consulted her anthropological files. Zephyrian military culture emphasizes duty, sacrifice, and loyalty to the Empire. Their warriors are trained to view death in battle as preferable to surrender or retreat. However, they also value tactical intelligence and strategic thinking. A Zephyrian commander who recognizes a hopeless situation may choose to preserve his forces for future operations rather than waste them in a futile gesture. In other words, they're not suicidal, just honorable. Correct, Admiral. They will fight to the death if they believe victory is possible, but they are not fanatical about dying uselessly. Shen made her decision. Open a channel to the Zephyrian flagship. Commander Vexhai needs to understand exactly what is about to happen to his fleet. The communication screen lit up with the image of the enemy commander. Vexhai looked older than he had at the beginning of the battle, his confidence replaced by grim determination. The alien officer was facing the collapse of everything he believed about warfare, but he was still fighting. Commander Vexhai, Shen began, I am contacting you to offer one final opportunity for surrender. In approximately 28 minutes, your fleet will be destroyed by weapons you cannot see, cannot evade, and cannot defend against. This is not a threat or a bluff. This is a tactical reality. Vexhai's 4 eyes focused on Shen with obvious suspicion. You claim to have weapons more powerful than what you have already deployed? I find that difficult to believe. 3 hours ago, before this battle began, we fired projectiles from our orbital defense grid. These projectiles are currently traveling toward your position at 85% of the speed of light. When they arrive, each one will release energy equivalent to hundreds of nuclear weapons. 64 such projectiles are inbound to your current coordinates. The alien commander was silent for several seconds, his mind clearly struggling to process the implications. You fired weapons 3 hours ago? Before the battle began? We calculated the exact time and location where your fleet would be positioned when you attempted your breakthrough assault. We fired weapons to arrive at that moment.
This entire battle has proceeded according to our strategic plan. Vexai stared at Chen with something approaching horror. You planned this entire engagement? Our movements, our tactics, our responses?
We studied your species for 30 years, Commander. We analyzed your technology, your tactics, your psychology, and your strategic doctrine. We knew exactly how you would respond to each phase of this battle because we understand how Imperial commanders think. Chen could see the alien officer struggling to maintain his composure as the full scope of the situation became clear. The humans had not simply defeated his fleet, they had orchestrated the entire battle like a symphony, manipulating Imperial forces into predetermined positions where they could be destroyed most efficiently.
26 minutes, Commander, Chen continued.
You can withdraw your fleet and preserve the lives of your remaining crews, or you can continue your assault and watch them die pointlessly. The choice is yours. Vexai looked away from the screen for several moments, apparently consulting with his staff. When he returned his attention to Chen, his expression had changed from grim determination to something approaching despair. If I withdraw, I will face execution upon my return to Imperial space. If I continue the assault, my crews will die for nothing.
You offer me no real choice. I offer you the chance to preserve lives, including your own.
Withdraw your fleet, Commander.
Live to fight another day.
Learn from this encounter and return to your empire with knowledge of what humanity is capable of. Your superiors need to understand what they face if they continue to threaten human space. The communication ended from the Zephyrian side, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts and the tactical display showing 64 invisible projectiles racing toward the enemy fleet at unimaginable speeds. Dr. Harper approached Chen's command chair with obvious concern.
Admiral, do you think he'll withdraw?
I don't know, Chen admitted.
But I gave him the opportunity. Whatever he chooses now is his responsibility.
On the tactical display, the Zephyrian fleet continued its approach toward the human formation, apparently maintaining their assault trajectory.
24 minutes until the defense grid projectiles arrived. 24 minutes for an alien commander to choose between certain death and possible disgrace. Chen found herself hoping that Commander Vexai would make the intelligent choice.
Commander Vexai stood alone in his private quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion, staring at the tactical display that showed the approaching human fleet.
22 minutes remained until whatever weapons the human admiral claimed to have fired would reach his position.
22 minutes to make a decision that would determine the fate of over 300,000 Zephyrian warriors under his command. His senior officers had been dismissed after their emergency conference. Subcommander Kreshtal had argued for immediate withdrawal, claiming that preserving the fleet was more important than military honor. Lieutenant Mordash had advocated for continuing the assault, insisting that the humans were bluffing about their hidden weapons.
Captain Zethnal had remained silent, leaving the decision entirely to Vexai's judgment.
The weight of command had never felt heavier. Vexai activated his personal communication array and established an encrypted connection to Admiral Telnax at Imperial Fleet Command. The transmission lag to Zephyrian space was 18 minutes each way, making real-time conversation impossible, but protocol required him to report the situation before making any final decisions.
Admiral Telnax, this is Commander Vexai reporting from the human front.
The tactical situation has developed in ways not anticipated by our intelligence estimates. Human military capabilities exceed all previous assessments. I am requesting immediate strategic guidance regarding continuation of current operations. Vexai paused, considering how to summarize the impossible reality he faced.
Sir, the human fleet has demonstrated kinetic weapon technology that renders our current tactical doctrine ineffective.
They have destroyed approximately 50% of our force strength using projectile weapons that penetrate our defensive screens and armor systems. More significantly, they claim to have fired additional weapons before the battle began that will arrive at our current position in 21 minutes. The words sounded absurd even as he spoke them.
Weapons fired before a battle began? Projectiles launched across interstellar distances with sufficient accuracy to target moving fleets?
It violated everything Vexai understood about space warfare, yet the evidence surrounded him in the form of destroyed Imperial vessels. Admiral, I am faced with an immediate decision regarding withdrawal versus continuation of current assault. The humans have offered surrender terms that would preserve my remaining forces but would require acknowledgement of defeat. I await your guidance, but, given transmission delays, I may be forced to act before receiving your response.
Vexhai terminated the transmission and returned his attention to the tactical display.
The human fleet maintained their defensive formation, making no attempt to pursue or engage the Imperial forces. They appeared to be simply waiting for something to happen. Waiting for their invisible weapons to arrive and complete the destruction of his fleet. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication from his bridge crew. "Sir," Lieutenant Mordash reported, "our sensor arrays have detected no evidence of incoming projectiles or guided weapons.
Long-range scanners show clear space in all directions out to maximum detection range." Vexhai was not surprised by the report.
If the humans were telling the truth about projectiles traveling at 85% light speed, they would be virtually undetectable until the moment of impact. The laws of physics made it impossible to see something moving that fast until it was too late to react.
But perhaps the humans were lying. Perhaps their claim about prepositioned weapons was simply psychological warfare designed to force him into an unnecessary retreat.
The human admiral had demonstrated considerable tactical intelligence. Using deception to achieve victory without further combat would be entirely consistent with her apparent capabilities. Vexhai opened another communication channel, this time to his fleet commanders. The faces of 12 senior captains appeared on his screen, representing the surviving heavy units of his force. These were officers who had served with him for decades, warriors who had earned their positions through courage and competence.
"Fellow commanders," Vexhai began, "we face a tactical situation unlike any in Imperial military history.
The humans have claimed that in 19 minutes, our fleet will be destroyed by weapons we cannot detect or defend against. I must decide whether to continue our assault or withdraw our forces to preserve them for future operations."
Captain Nethvar of the Dreadnought Imperial might spoke first. "Commander, with respect, if the humans possessed such devastating weapons, why have they not used them already?
Their current forces have inflicted significant damage, but our fleet remains capable of combat. I believe their claims are designed to induce panic and force unnecessary retreat."
Captain Yesmol of the cruiser Stellar Vengeance disagreed. "Captain Nethvar, the humans have already demonstrated weapons technology that exceeds our understanding. Their kinetic projectiles have destroyed 4 dreadnoughts with single hits. We must consider the possibility that they speak truthfully about additional capabilities." "But projectiles fired before the battle began?" Captain Rethsan interjected. "The targeting calculations alone would be impossible. How could they predict our exact position hours in advance?" Vexhai listened to the debate with growing understanding.
His officers were struggling with the same cognitive dissonance he faced. The human claim seemed impossible by conventional military logic, yet everything about this battle had violated conventional logic from the beginning.
"Captains," Vexhai interrupted, "the humans have already demonstrated impossible capabilities.
They have used primitive kinetic weapons to devastating effect against our advanced energy weapon systems. They have predicted our tactical responses with uncanny accuracy. They have fought this entire engagement as if they knew exactly what we would do at every stage." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "The question is not whether their claims seem possible by our standards. The question is whether we can afford to assume they are lying." Captain Nethvar remained unconvinced. "Commander, if we retreat without completing our mission, the Empire will consider us cowards. The political consequences of defeat here will affect the entire Fourth Conquest Fleet. Our failure will embolden other species to resist Imperial expansion." Captain Nethvar raises a valid concern, Captain Yesmol acknowledged.
"However, if we continue the assault and suffer total fleet destruction, the political consequences will be far worse.
The Empire cannot afford to lose an entire conquest fleet to a species that was considered primitive just hours ago." Vexhai realized that his officers were simply reflecting his own internal debate. Military honor demanded that they continue fighting regardless of odds. Strategic wisdom suggested that preserving the fleet was more important than winning a single battle. Personal survival instincts argued for immediate withdrawal.
16 minutes remain, Vexhai announced. "I am making my decision based on the following logic.
If the humans are lying about their hidden weapons, we can resume our assault after withdrawing to a safer distance. If they are telling the truth, continuing our current course will result in the deaths of everyone under my command." He looked at each captain in turn. "I choose to preserve your lives and the lives of your crews. All ships will withdraw to minimum safe distance and await further orders."
Captain Nethvar's expression showed obvious disappointment, but he responded with professional discipline.
Acknowledged, Commander. The Imperial Might will comply with withdrawal orders.
One by one, the other captains confirmed their compliance. Vex-High could see the mixture of relief and uncertainty in their faces.
They were experienced officers who understood the tactical situation, but they were also products of a military culture that valued courage over caution.
Signal the human flagship, Vex-High ordered. Inform Admiral Chen that the Imperial fleet is withdrawing to coordinates 50 Mark 88. We will observe the results of whatever weapons they claim to have deployed.
The communication was brief. Admiral Chen acknowledged the withdrawal and confirmed that the Imperial fleet would not be pursued as long as they maintained a distance of at least 50,000 kilometers from human forces. Vex-High watched his fleet change course and begin accelerating away from the human formation. 347 vessels, the largest concentration of Imperial military power ever assembled for a single operation, retreating from a force less than half its size. The historical implications were staggering.
12 minutes passed in tense silence.
The Imperial fleet reached the minimum safe distance specified by Admiral Chen and held position. Sensor arrays focused on the area where they had been positioned when the withdrawal order was given. If the humans had been telling the truth, something should happen soon. Sir, Lieutenant Mordash reported, we are detecting multiple high-energy impacts in the combat zone. The energy signatures are consistent with kinetic weapon strikes, but the magnitude is... Mordash stopped speaking as his instruments registered readings beyond their design parameters. On the tactical display, brilliant flashes of light marked the positions where the Imperial fleet would have been if Vex-High had continued the assault.
64 flashes, each brighter than a star.
Energy release equivalent to strategic nuclear weapons, Mordash whispered. Multiple impacts across a volume of space 300 kilometers in diameter. Sir, if we had maintained our previous position,
we would all be dead, Vex-High finished. The display showed the aftermath of the strikes.
The space where his fleet had been positioned was now filled with expanding spheres of superheated plasma and scattered atomic particles. The energy release was so massive that it was creating its own electromagnetic effects, disrupting sensor readings across a significant area. No ship could have survived exposure to such weapons.
No technology in the Imperial arsenal could provide meaningful protection against kinetic weapons of that magnitude. The humans had not been bluffing.
They had fired those projectiles hours before the battle began, calculating exactly where his fleet would be positioned when their assault reached its climax.
A new communication arrived from Admiral Chen.
Commander Vex-High, I trust you now understand the situation more clearly. We have no desire to continue this conflict, but we will not hesitate to defend ourselves if attacked. I suggest you report these events to your superiors and recommend that future diplomatic contact be conducted through appropriate channels rather than military action. Vex-High stared at the tactical display for several more minutes, trying to comprehend the scope of what he had just witnessed. The humans had not simply defeated his fleet, they had demonstrated mastery of warfare at a level that made Imperial military doctrine obsolete. Lieutenant Mordash, Vex-High said finally, prepare a detailed report of this engagement for transmission to Imperial Fleet Command. Include all sensor data, tactical analyses, and weapon performance measurements. The Empire needs to understand exactly what they face in human space. Sir, how should I classify the human military capability level?
Vex-High considered the question.
Imperial threat assessment protocols included classifications for primitive, developing, advanced, and superior military capabilities.
The humans had demonstrated technology that exceeded every category in the classification system. Create a new classification, Vex-High ordered.
Label them as a strategic threat requiring immediate diplomatic resolution. Recommend that all future contact with humanity be conducted through peaceful channels and that no military action be considered without complete strategic review at the highest levels of Imperial command. As his fleet began the long journey back to Zephyrian space, Vex-High reflected on the lessons of the engagement. He had believed he understood war because he had studied the conflicts between known spacefaring civilizations. But humanity represented something entirely different. They were a species that had perfected warfare as an art form before they had learned to travel between stars.
The implications were terrifying. If humans could develop such devastating weapons in just 50 years of spaceflight, what would they be capable of given more time? What other innovations might they achieve by approaching military technology from perspectives that no other species had considered? Vex-High realized that he had not simply lost a battle.
He had encountered a species that thought about war in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. The humans were not just another spacefaring race to be conquered and integrated into the Empire. They were something new, something unprecedented, something that would force every military power in the galaxy to reconsider their basic strategies. For the first time in Imperial history, a conquest fleet was returning home with a recommendation that the target species be approached as equals rather than subjects. Vexhai suspected that this recommendation would not be well received by his superiors, but the alternative was to continue sending fleets against an enemy that understood warfare better than anyone else in known space. As the Eternal Dominion entered hyperspace for the journey home, Vexhai began composing his personal report to the Emperor himself. The message would be simple and direct: humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They were masters of war who had chosen to fight defensively rather than aggressively. If the Empire wanted to avoid a catastrophic conflict that could threaten Imperial civilization itself, diplomatic solutions were the only rational option. The age of easy conquest was over. The humans had just proven that military superiority was not simply a matter of technology or numbers. It was a matter of thinking about warfare in ways that other species had never imagined.
And, in that regard, humanity was superior to every known civilization in the galaxy.
3 months after the Battle of Sol, Admiral Saracen stood in the Situation Room beneath the Pentagon, surrounded by the most senior military and political leaders of the Sol Republic. The holographic display at the center of the room showed a three-dimensional map of known galactic civilization, with red indicators marking Imperial territories and yellow markers representing species under Zephyrian control.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Morrison began, Admiral Chen's victory at Sol has fundamentally altered humanity's position in galactic politics. We are no longer an unknown species on the periphery of civilization.
We are now a recognized military power that has defeated the Empire's most advanced fleet. The question before us today is how we respond to the consequences of that victory. Secretary of Defense Williams gestured toward the display. Intelligence reports indicate that news of the Imperial defeat has spread throughout Zephyrian space and beyond. 6 client species have declared independence from Imperial rule, citing humanity's victory as proof that the Empire can be defeated. 3 additional species have requested military assistance from the Sol Republic to support their own independence movements. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, now serving as Director of Xenological Studies, highlighted several regions on the galactic map. The political implications extend beyond simple military considerations. The Empire's authority was built on the perception of invincibility. Commander Vexhai's reports to Imperial Fleet Command have apparently included detailed analyses of human weapons and tactics, which has led to significant debate within Zephyrian leadership regarding future expansion policies.
Chen listened to the briefing with growing concern.
She had won a defensive victory against an Imperial invasion force, but the consequences were spiraling far beyond anything she had anticipated. The humans had wanted to be left alone; instead, they had become the center of a galactic political crisis.
What is the current status of Imperial forces? President Morrison asked. General Rodriguez, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, consulted his classified briefing materials.
Intelligence indicates that the Empire has suspended all expansion operations pending a complete review of military doctrine.
They are apparently struggling to develop countermeasures against kinetic weapon technology.
More significantly, they are facing internal political pressure from client species who now view them as vulnerable.
And the requests for military assistance? 12 species have made formal requests for weapons technology transfers.
8 have requested direct military intervention against Imperial forces in their territories. 3 have proposed military alliances with humanity for mutual defense against Imperial retaliation.
Chen understood the strategic implications immediately.
Humanity had won a single battle, but they were now being asked to lead a galactic rebellion against the most powerful military force in known space. The Sol Republic had a population of 8 billion people spread across 3 star systems. The Zephyrian Empire controlled over 400 star systems and commanded the loyalty of dozens of client species. Mr. President, Chen said, I need to address several critical factors that may not be apparent from these intelligence reports. Our victory at Sol was achieved through careful preparation, strategic planning, and technological advantages that may not be sustainable in a prolonged conflict.
She stood and approached the holographic display.
First, our kinetic weapons are extremely effective against Imperial technology, but they require massive infrastructure to manufacture and deploy. The orbital defense grid took 15 years to construct and represents a significant portion of our total military production capacity.
We cannot equip rebel fleets with similar weapons on short notice.
Second, Chen continued, our tactical success was largely based on superior intelligence about Imperial capabilities and doctrine.
We spent 30 years studying their technology and tactics before engaging them. The Empire is now studying our capabilities with equal intensity. Future engagements will not benefit from the element of surprise.
Dr. Harper nodded in agreement.
Admiral Chen is correct about the intelligence factor.
Imperial scientists are apparently reverse engineering our kinetic weapon technology and developing countermeasures. They are also adapting their tactical doctrine to account for relativistic projectiles.
Future Imperial fleets may be significantly more challenging to defeat.
President Morrison frowned at the implications.
Are you suggesting that our victory was a one-time event? That we cannot repeat our success against Imperial forces?
I'm suggesting that we won because we understood them better than they understood us, Chen replied.
That advantage is temporary.
More importantly, we won because we fought defensively in our own space using weapons specifically designed for that purpose. Projecting military power across interstellar distances is an entirely different challenge. Secretary Williams highlighted several star systems on the galactic map.
But surely our technological advantages provide some foundation for supporting these independence movements?
These species are asking for our help specifically because they believe human weapons can defeat Imperial forces.
Chen considered the question carefully.
The requests for assistance were understandable, but they reflected fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of humanity's victory. Mr. Secretary, our weapons are effective, but they are not magical solutions to military problems. Kinetic weapons require sophisticated targeting systems, massive power sources, and precise manufacturing capabilities. Most of these rebel species lack the industrial infrastructure to support such technology.
More critically, she continued, our defensive victory was achieved through careful preparation in familiar territory.
Supporting offensive operations in distant star systems would require us to project force across hundreds of light-years while maintaining supply lines through potentially hostile space.
The logistical challenges alone would be enormous.
General Rodriguez raised another concern.
Admiral, there is also the question of Imperial retaliation.
If we begin actively supporting rebel movements, the Empire may decide that humanity represents an existential threat requiring extreme measures.
Their current defensive posture could change to active aggression against human space. The room fell silent as the implications settled.
Humanity had achieved an unexpected victory, but the strategic situation remained precarious. Supporting galactic rebellion could lead to a conflict that would dwarf the battle of soul in scope and consequences. Dr. Harper consulted her anthropological files on Zephyrian culture. There may be diplomatic alternatives to direct military intervention. Imperial culture values strength and competence, but they also respect strategic intelligence. Commander Vexhi's reports apparently emphasized humanity's tactical superiority rather than simple technological advantages.
There may be opportunities for negotiated settlements that preserve both human interests and Imperial authority.
Explain, President Morrison requested. The Empire is facing internal pressure from client species who believe rebellion is possible.
However, they are also dealing with the reality that human weapons represent a significant threat to Imperial military doctrine.
A negotiated agreement that recognizes human sovereignty while limiting direct support for rebel movements might serve both parties' interests.
Chen found the diplomatic approach intriguing but problematic.
Dr. Harper, such negotiations would require us to essentially abandon the species that have requested our assistance.
From a moral standpoint, that presents serious ethical concerns.
True, Harper acknowledged. But, from a strategic standpoint, attempting to support widespread rebellion against the Empire could result in the destruction of both the rebel species and humanity itself. The Empire commands enormous resources and has extensive experience in crushing resistance movements. Secretary Williams posed the central question.
Admiral Chen, in your professional opinion, could humanity successfully support a large-scale rebellion against Imperial authority?
Chen stared at the galactic map for several long seconds, calculating the mathematical realities of interstellar warfare.
Mr.
Secretary, humanity could probably win defensive battles in our own space for the foreseeable future.
Our technological advantages and strategic position make direct conquest of human worlds extremely difficult.
However, projecting sufficient force to support effective rebellion across imperial space would require military resources we simply do not possess.
What would we need to make such operations feasible? Time, Chen replied without hesitation. Decades of military buildup, technological development, and strategic preparation.
We would need to expand our industrial base, develop new weapons systems, establish forward bases, and build alliance networks. Most importantly, we would need to maintain technological superiority while the Empire adapts to our capabilities. President Morrison leaned back in his chair, considering the options.
So we face a choice between abandoning potential allies or committing to a conflict that could last for generations? Not necessarily, Chen said. There may be a third option.
Limited support for carefully selected operations that demonstrate continuing human capabilities without triggering massive imperial retaliation. Surgical strikes rather than general rebellion. Diplomatic pressure combined with the credible threat of military intervention. General Rodriguez examined the strategic implications.
A graduated response approach? Provide enough support to maintain the credibility of resistance movements while avoiding actions that would provoke total war? Exactly.
The key is maintaining the perception that human military intervention is possible while avoiding actual large-scale deployment. Let the Empire worry about potential human involvement rather than dealing with confirmed human aggression.
Dr. Harper nodded approvingly.
Such an approach would be consistent with human strategic doctrine as the Empire now understands it.
They have seen our defensive capabilities and our planning abilities. The threat of intervention may be more effective than actual intervention.
President Morrison made his decision.
Admiral Chen, you will develop strategic options for limited intervention in support of selected independence movements.
Focus on operations that can be conducted with minimal resource commitment but maximum psychological impact.
Dr.
Harper, you will establish diplomatic contacts with imperial authorities to explore negotiated settlements that recognize human sovereignty while addressing their concerns about technological proliferation.
And the requests for direct military assistance?
Secretary Williams asked. We will provide limited technological support and tactical advice to selected groups, but we will not commit to direct military intervention unless human interests are directly threatened, Morrison replied.
Our goal is to maintain strategic balance, not to trigger a galactic war.
As the meeting concluded, Chen reflected on the complexities of victory. The Battle of Seoul had been a clear success, but success in war often created as many problems as it solved. Humanity had proven that the Empire could be defeated, but now they faced the challenge of managing the consequences of that proof without destroying themselves in the process.
The next phase of human involvement in galactic politics would require the same careful planning and strategic thinking that had won the Battle of Seoul.
But, instead of preparing for a single defensive engagement, they would need to navigate the complex politics of interstellar diplomacy while maintaining the military capabilities that had made them a significant power. Chen looked at the galactic map one more time, noting the positions of potential allies and enemies scattered across hundreds of star systems. Somewhere among those stars, Imperial fleet commanders were studying the lessons of Seoul and preparing countermeasures against human weapons. Other species were looking toward human space with hope for liberation or fear of retaliation.
The age of easy answers was over. Humanity had become a galactic power, and galactic powers faced galactic responsibilities.
2 years after the Battle of Seoul, Commander Vexai stood in the Imperial War Council chamber on Zephyr Prime, facing the assembled leadership of the greatest military power in galactic history. The chamber itself spoke of imperial authority, walls of polished obsidian inlaid with precious metals from 100 conquered worlds, holographic displays showing the vast extent of Zephyrian dominion, and the ceremonial weapons of legendary commanders who had expanded the empire across the stars. Emperor Kethmar himself presided over the session, his ancient form enhanced by life-extending technology that had allowed him to rule for over 3 centuries. Beside him sat Admiral Telnax, Supreme Fleet Commander, and General Zyxtar, Director of Imperial Intelligence. These were beings who had shaped galactic politics for generations, leaders who had never known defeat until a species of primitives from the galactic periphery had shattered their assumptions about warfare. Commander Vexai, the Emperor began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, your reports regarding human military capabilities have been analyzed by our finest strategic minds.
We have studied their weapons, their tactics, and their apparent strategic goals.
Today we require your assessment of their true intentions and capabilities for long-term conflict.
Vexhai had spent 2 years preparing for this moment.
His detailed reports on the Battle of Seoul had triggered a complete reorganization of imperial military doctrine, led to the suspension of expansion operations, and caused political upheaval throughout Zephyrian space. Now he faced the challenge of explaining humanity to leaders who had never encountered an equal military power. Your Imperial Majesty, Vexhai replied with formal precision, humanity represents a strategic threat unlike any in imperial history. They have achieved military capabilities that challenge our fundamental assumptions about warfare, but, more significantly, they have demonstrated strategic intelligence that suggests long-term planning capabilities equal or superior to our own.
Admiral Telnax leaned forward with obvious skepticism.
Commander, you credit these humans with extraordinary abilities based on a single engagement. Our intelligence analysis suggests they achieved victory through technological advantages rather than superior strategy.
Surely their weapons can be countered through appropriate tactical adaptations? Vexhai had anticipated this question.
Imperial leadership wanted to believe that human victory was an anomaly that could be corrected through conventional military solutions. The truth was far more complex and threatening.
Admiral Telnax, with respect, that analysis underestimates the scope of human strategic planning.
They did not simply deploy superior weapons, they orchestrated the entire engagement according to their predetermined objectives. They predicted our tactical responses with perfect accuracy and positioned their forces to exploit our doctrinal limitations.
He gestured toward the holographic display showing the Battle of Seoul. More critically, subsequent intelligence indicates that humans have been preparing for galactic conflict for decades before we made contact.
Their weapons systems were designed specifically to counter Imperial military technology. Their tactical doctrine was developed to exploit weaknesses in our established strategies. General ZY consulted his intelligence files with obvious concern.
Commander, are you suggesting that humanity has been studying Imperial capabilities without our knowledge?
Our security protocols should have prevented such extensive intelligence gathering.
General, the humans monitored our communications networks for 30 years before the engagement.
They analyzed captured technology from client species, studied the patterns of our expansion campaigns, and developed detailed profiles of Imperial military capabilities. When we arrived at their space, they knew more about our fleet than our own intelligence services did. The Emperor's four eyes focused on Vexhai with intense attention.
Explain this assertion, Commander. How could a species with 50 years of spaceflight capability conduct intelligence operations against the Empire?
Vexhai chose his words carefully. Your Majesty, humanity approaches intelligence gathering with the same systematic methodology they apply to warfare. They do not simply collect information, they analyze patterns, predict behaviors, and develop comprehensive strategic assessments. Their intelligence operations were designed to understand not just our technology, but our thinking.
He paused, organizing his thoughts. Most significantly, they have continued these operations since our engagement. Current intelligence suggests they maintain detailed surveillance of Imperial military activities throughout our territory.
They monitor our fleet movements, our technological development, and our political discussions.
Admiral Telnax's mandibles clicked with irritation.
Commander, you suggest that these humans possess intelligence capabilities superior to our own services. If this were true, they would be conducting offensive operations against Imperial territories rather than maintaining defensive positions. Admiral, that assumption reveals exactly the type of strategic thinking that made our defeat possible, Vexhai replied with growing confidence. You assume that superior intelligence capabilities necessarily lead to aggressive action. Humans understand that defensive positions are often strategically superior to offensive operations, especially when facing a larger opponent.
General ZY raised another concern.
Commander, our analysis of human territorial expansion shows only limited colonization activities. If they possess the capabilities you describe, why have they not expanded their territory more aggressively? Vexhai had studied this question extensively during his 2 years of analysis.
The answer revealed fundamental differences between human and Imperial strategic thinking. General, humans appear to prioritize technological development and strategic preparation over territorial acquisition.
They are building military capabilities rather than claiming star systems. Intelligence indicates they are constructing additional orbital defense grids in multiple star systems and developing even more advanced kinetic weapon technology.
More advanced, the Emperor inquired.
You assured us their weapons represented the pinnacle of kinetic weapon development.
Your Majesty, I was incorrect.
Recent intelligence suggests they are developing projectile weapons capable of 95% light speed.
They are also working on guided kinetic interceptors and multi-stage acceleration systems.
Their weapons technology continues to advance at rates that exceed our own development programs.
The chamber fell silent as the implications registered.
The Empire had spent 2 years attempting to develop countermeasures against existing human weapons, only to discover that humanity was already developing superior systems.
Admiral Telnax posed the critical question. Commander, in your professional assessment, could Imperial forces achieve victory against humanity in direct military confrontation?
Vexhai had prepared for this moment throughout his career, but he had never expected to deliver such an assessment to Imperial leadership. Admiral, based on current capabilities and trends, Imperial forces could not achieve decisive victory against humanity without accepting casualties that would threaten the stability of the Empire itself. The Emperor's expression remained impassive, but Vexhai could sense the shock rippling through the chamber.
Explain your reasoning, Commander.
Your Majesty, humanity has demonstrated the ability to destroy Imperial fleets using weapons we cannot effectively counter. Their defensive positions are supported by infrastructure we cannot target without massive force projection across interstellar distances. Most critically, they have shown the ability to predict our strategic responses and prepare countermeasures in advance. Vexhai activated the chamber's tactical display, showing his analysis of potential conflict scenarios. Our best-case projections indicate that successful military action against humanity would require the deployment of 60% of total Imperial fleet strength for a minimum of 5 years. Such deployment would leave our existing territories vulnerable to rebellion and would consume resources equivalent to the total economic output of 50 Imperial worlds.
And the probability of success? General ZYX asked.
Approximately 30%, assuming humanity does not develop additional technological advantages during the conflict period. If they continue their current rate of weapons development, the probability of Imperial victory decreases to less than 10%.
Admiral Telnax struggled to accept the mathematical reality. Commander, you are suggesting that the Empire cannot defeat a species with a population less than 1% of our own?
Admiral, I am suggesting that population size is irrelevant when the enemy possesses weapons that can destroy our largest fleets with minimal resource expenditure. Humanity has achieved what every military theorist considered impossible. They have developed weapons technology that makes conventional fleet actions obsolete.
The Emperor considered the assessment for several long minutes. Commander Vexhai, what do you recommend regarding future Imperial policy toward humanity?
Vexhai had prepared for this question, but the answer challenged everything he had believed about Imperial destiny. Your Majesty, I recommend immediate diplomatic contact with human authorities to negotiate a formal peace treaty. The Empire should recognize human territorial sovereignty and establish trade relationships that benefit both civilizations. You recommend negotiation with equals? The Emperor asked with obvious surprise.
I recommend negotiation with superiors, Your Majesty.
In military capability, strategic intelligence, and technological development, humanity has demonstrated advantages that make them the most dangerous opponent the Empire has ever faced.
More importantly, they have shown restraint in using those advantages.
They could have pursued offensive operations against Imperial territories, but they have chosen diplomatic solutions instead.
General ZYX consulted his intelligence assessments. Commander, what evidence supports this claim of restraint?
General, intelligence indicates that humanity has received requests for military assistance from 18 species seeking independence from Imperial rule. They have provided limited technological support but have avoided direct military intervention. They possess the capability to support massive rebellion throughout Imperial space, but they have chosen not to exercise that capability.
The implications were staggering.
Humanity could have triggered a galactic war that might have destroyed Imperial civilization, but they had chosen restraint over aggression. They were demonstrating the same strategic intelligence that had won the Battle of Seoul, recognizing that their own interests were better served by negotiation than by conflict. Your Majesty, Vexhai continued, humanity represents both our greatest threat and our greatest opportunity. As a threat, they possess military capabilities that could destroy Imperial power.
As an opportunity, they have demonstrated willingness to coexist peacefully with civilizations that respect their sovereignty. Admiral Telnax raised a final concern. Commander, what guarantee do we have that human restraint will continue?
If they continue developing military capabilities at current rates, they may eventually conclude that imperial power represents a threat requiring elimination.
Vexhai had considered this possibility extensively. Admiral, that concern emphasizes the importance of immediate diplomatic engagement.
We must establish formal relationships with humanity while they still view negotiation as preferable to military action. Delay increases the probability that they will eventually conclude that imperial power is incompatible with their security requirements. The Emperor made his decision.
Commander Vexhai, you will lead a diplomatic mission to human space with full authority to negotiate a formal treaty.
Your objective is to establish peaceful coexistence that recognizes both imperial authority over our existing territories and human sovereignty over their claimed systems.
Your Majesty, what terms are acceptable for such negotiations? Whatever terms prevent a war that would destroy imperial civilization, Commander.
You have convinced us that humanity represents a threat we cannot eliminate through military action. Therefore, we must neutralize that threat through diplomatic means. As the War Council session concluded, Vexhai reflected on the historic nature of the moment. For the first time in imperial history, they were preparing to negotiate with another species as equals. More significantly, they were recognizing that imperial expansion had reached its natural limits. Humanity had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. Without conquering a single imperial world or destroying a single imperial fleet beyond those sent against them, they had forced the greatest military power in the galaxy to accept the reality of their own limitations. The age of imperial expansion was over, not because the empire lacked the will to continue, but because they had encountered a species that understood war better than they did. Humanity had demonstrated that true military superiority was not about possessing the largest fleets or the most territory. It was about understanding conflict so thoroughly that victory could be achieved without fighting. As Vexhai prepared for his journey to human space, he realized that he was not just negotiating a peace treaty. He was acknowledging humanity's position as the supreme military power in the galaxy, a species that had mastered war so completely that they could end conflicts without fighting them. The Empire would survive, but it would never be the same. Humanity had shown them the future of warfare, and, in that future, the greatest victories belonged to those who understood that the ultimate expression of military power was the wisdom to avoid using it.